This story contains violent and distressing content, including references to self-harm and suicide. It's August 2023. A 13-year-old girl with a severe intellectual disability has just been put into an isolation cell in a Queensland police watch house.
Sit down.
I wasn't doing anything.
Now.
Obeying the rules, Missy.
Sit.
I wasn't doing anything when I was in there, you
On the ground.
The room is called The Box, and it's meant for violent and dangerous adult prisoners. In Queensland, it's also used for children.
It's too cold in here. It is too cold in here.
The girl was brought into isolation after throwing toilet paper at a CCTV camera.
Your behaviour is
No, I was just sitting there.
The box has no windows and is freezing cold. The girl becomes increasingly distressed and tries to get out multiple times. Officers try to restrain her so they can walk out.
Get your blanket. Why are you squeezing on me?
We're not sweating.
Oh,
We're
you
squeezing.
are.
Stop fighting.
I'm not trapped like this.
Stop fighting.
In here. I'm not kidding you. It's too cold.
On the fourth attempt, the door is shut on her arm.
It really hurts. You hit my head. Oh, you hit my head. No, it really hurts.
Open the door, mate. We'll break it in.
Queensland locks up more kids than anywhere else in Australia.
I make no apology for keeping the community safe.
Some say the state is in the grip of a youth crime crisis.
They entered through the side door. They were armed with knives.
But the kids being locked up are among the most vulnerable, many with disabilities.
There is no such thing as a bad kid. There are traumatised children.
Children are being held for weeks at a time in police watch houses, places meant to hold Queensland's highest risk adult prisoners.
You feel like you're dead. It's not a good place.
It's the way that I would treat my dog rather than a human being.
For years, there have been human rights concerns about what happens to children inside Queensland's police watch houses. After a year-long investigation by Guardian Australia and SBS The Feed, we've obtained footage that shows the treatment of kids in these places and when they're put in isolation.
You said you want to talk to me, lady. They were hurting you. They were hurting my head. They were.
Most kids who get locked up re-offend. In the far north, dozens of vulnerable young people are locked in that spiral, many of them Indigenous. It's a Thursday evening in Cairns, and we're meeting up with a local youth service, doing their bit to keep kids out of trouble.
Yeti Diversion, Rini speaking. We're going to come past now, okay?
Local kids know their number.
Good on you. We'll see you again, eh?
You want a snack? Mainly chips and LCMs.
The service helps kids, some younger than 10, who are out at night, and tries to get them home safely.
The seatbelt there, my boy.
The same night, the police are running a youth crime operation in Cairns.
Stop throwing yourself around. You've been arrested.
Task Force Guardian, where officers are flown in from other locations. It's meant a record number of kids have been arrested.
The youth crime figures do go down momentarily, but that's just shifting the problem into the watch house and not preventing it from reoccurring. It's a really awful environment for young people. It's damaging and traumatising. Watch houses exist because they are designed to hold adults for maybe one night, 2 nights at most if they're drying out from a night on the drink or if they're being violent or coming down from drugs. They're attached to police stations and they're designed just to hold people for a short-term period of time.
But many kids are held here indefinitely, some as young as 11 and sometimes for weeks at a time.
The holding of young people in the adult watch houses for long periods of time is arguably a breach of their human rights. There's a real level of mistreatment, particularly of high numbers of Aboriginal young people. It's quite shocking.
The 13-year-old girl, who we're calling Sam, injures her hand when it's caught in the door of an isolation cell.
It really hurts. It really hurts.
You just did that to yourself because of you being silly.
She's then taken to hospital, but is woken at 2 a.m. to be taken back to the watch house.
My arm! You're hurting my arm so
Just
much.
walk.
You're hurting my arm! He just squeezed my sore head! He just squeezed my sore head! Stop! Stop!
Because the 13-year-old is listed as a violent prisoner, police place her in leg shackles.
Sore head!
Stop fighting.
Sore head!
Stand up.
Stop my sore head! It's on my sore head! It hurts!
She refuses to be moved, but police manage to get her into their car to take her back to the watch house.
You hurt my arm again! You hurt my arm again! You hurt my arm again!
She then jumps out the back window and tries to run.
She's jumping. She's jumping. Sit on the ground.
You're hurting me! You're hurting me! You're hurting me!
She's then restrained by her neck.
Honey, why are you putting your finger in my throat?
Listen, you are not listening to instructions, okay?
Yeah, I never spat on anyone, did I? No, I didn't.
Get your hands off
I
me.
didn't spit on anyone!
It's against the law in Queensland to identify children who've been before the juvenile justice system. But what we can tell you is that Sam is severely affected by fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, or FASD, an intellectual disability.
Get in now! I don't care, get in! They were hurting it! They were hurting my head!
Get in.
They were hurting me!
My granddaughter, she functions probably from a 5-year-old age.
Her grandmother, who we're calling Alice, has cared for Sam since she was 9 months old.
Living in this world is very scary for her, and she doesn't always understand why she's arrested.
Sam's on the serious repeat offender list, which means she's targeted by the Specialist Youth Crime Squad, Task Force Guardian. She's been arrested for petty offences and also acts of violence.
We've had various responses from police. Some are very nice and understanding, but they've got a job to do. Some police officers have said to me they don't care that they've been told to arrest her for everything, even though the watch house is not the right place for her.
In October last year, she was arrested again and taken back to the Cairns watch house.
We're gonna move you. We're gonna move you
Where are you moving to?
to the nice comfy cell.
That's not comfy, that's too cold.
Or you're banging your head.
She's put in isolation after banging her head against the cell door.
Yeah, well, this lady said she was gonna talk to me. You said you were gonna talk to me, lady.
So it's been like 7 times today. I had to go into her cell like 6 times.
Is that a kid in there?
In the cell, Sam urinates on her clothes, strips naked, and refuses to put on a prison smock or cover herself with a blanket.
Here,
What is that gonna do? I'm still gonna smell like this.
put a shirt on, please.
I'm still gonna smell like this.
Put a shirt.
The standoff lasts for hours. She continues to bang her head against the wall and punches herself in the face.
That's not helping anything.
That was one of the worst times. Because she had no clothes on and she was naked in this cell, it's like torture really, because it's really noisy and the lights are on and she just doesn't get any peace. And I felt very distressed even being there for an hour and a half talking to her.
Sam has the mental capacity of a kindergarten child and the language skills of a 3-year-old. She's been deemed unfit to stand trial in court.
She doesn't understand social norms, so if she likes someone's necklace, she may take that necklace even though that is her friend, but that's part of her disability. If you see her, she'll colour in and she gets all excited about little childish things, but then there's also the other side of her, which is a teenager swearing at you, so people see that side.
Catherine Hayes advocates for kids who've been in the watch house. We showed her the footage of Sam being taken to the isolation cell.
Oh, she's so little. It's awful. Poor little thing. She was no threat to anyone's safety. She was tiny, tiny little thing. It clearly seems to be used as a disciplinary measure. It's horrifying.
Police told us isolation cells are used for prisoners who are violent, aggressive, or exhibiting harmful behaviour.
We've seen quite a number of examples of kids being held in the isolation cells for punishment if they've not acted in a way that is approved of by the officers, then they're put in the box.
No, I asked you what you told him, and you wouldn't let me. You wouldn't give it to me, and you kept on putting it on camera when we left. So we said that this was your last chance, otherwise you were going in here.
My granddaughter's behaviours have changed since being in the watch house. We've noticed some new self-harming behaviours. One notably is her banging her head and scratching, and she has bitten herself before. She reverts back to a very young child of a 3-year-old, and she doesn't always fully recover from that.
In February this year, a government psychologist working in the Cairns Watch House likened the facility to child abuse. The cells were overcrowded after a task force guardian operation. She wrote to authorities about a 13-year-old boy who she said was at risk of assault due to his size and having been placed in a crowded cell with 3 older boys. A few days later, the boy was allegedly sexually assaulted. About the same time in February, a blanket was set on fire in a watch house cell holding 4 boys.
Why can't you breathe?
Hours later, one of the boys was gasping for air.
Well, if you can talk, you sound like you're breathing okay.
We are aware of a large number of awful incidents that have taken place in watch houses across the state. Young people being beaten up by either cellmates or guards, men exposing themselves to young girls or young children.
Queensland Police declined multiple requests for an interview, but said in a statement that when a young person is taken into custody, their physical and mental health are assessed. Police didn't comment on specific cases, but said they were aware of allegations and that these would be investigated. Jaden is an Indigenous teenager who's been in the watch house about 25 times and youth detention more than a dozen times. He's 18, so we're able to identify him.
My first time I went to the watch house was, I think I was 11. When you're in there for like up to 2 weeks, it does your head in. It feels like you're in there for months. You don't even know what day it is, you don't feel real.
He's now out of the system, but still impacted by his time in the watch house and in isolation.
I've been put in isolation a couple times. Like, it's worse than being in a cell. It's a head because that makes the time go even slower if that's possible. 10 minutes feels like an hour, 2 hours. Most people I ever see go in there, none of them try to hurt themselves. It's always for arguing with the coppers or some shit, and they're just straight in there.
Jaden says he's sometimes had to share a cell with 4 or 5 other boys.
It's always hard to sleep. Like, all you're doing is stressing yourself out because you don't know what's going to happen next. You feel like disappointed yourself for getting locked up, and you're just angry because how the treat you.
There's a strong feeling within the community that children who commit crimes should face consequences. But what's the consequence of holding a child in a watch house or an isolation cell?
When kids are coming out of the watch house or the detention centre at the moment, they are angry, they are traumatised.
Debate about youth crime in Queensland is intensifying. It has become one of the key issues ahead of the upcoming Queensland election, with many victims calling for a crackdown.
We were sleeping, right? It was quite early, and my wife heard a very loud bang. She came out to check, and then she saw the garage open, and the side wall of the garage was down.
A group of teenagers broke into their house through the side door.
What we saw on CCTV camera, that was really terrifying for us. We saw a large group of offenders armed with knives around the house, just a few meters from my two daughters' bedroom. That's what I moved to Australia to not have anymore, to live in fear, to live all the time paranoid that something can happen, or to not let my kids go play on the streets.
The group stole both of the family's cars.
We started sleeping locked in a single bedroom, like my daughters and my wife. The losses that were claimed, $130,000. I think the situation about youth crime in Queensland is terrible. Every single day on the news there is houses being broken into by youth criminals.
But data shows the youth crime rates are actually going down. It's a small group who are committing crimes and reoffending.
I think the conditions on the watch houses are appalling, and I think it needs to be humane, but at the same time it needs to be a punishment.
While many victims just want to feel safe, on social media, the youth crime debate can sometimes turn extreme. Thousands have joined crime monitoring groups that post live updates. Posts often include calls for vigilantism, death threats, and racist abuse.
I understand the victim thinking, this young person stole my car, they need to be punished. Absolutely. You can't steal someone's car and not have a consequence.
Tim Spall is a Gidja man and a psychologist who has worked with First Nations young people in Brisbane for over 20 years.
My argument is that consequence should lead to better outcomes for both. If we don't do that, we're feeding these kids back into the same system, and then they come back out and commit the same offence or similar offences again.
He says he's seen the consequences of putting kids, many who have intellectual disabilities, in adult watch houses and the wider youth justice system.
I don't think people understand the circumstances that a lot of these kids grow up in and the struggles that they face.
I think you'll be going to court tomorrow.
You know how many times I've heard that?
Okay, listen.
Like 20 times. And then it's not actually tomorrow.
Sam and many others in the justice system have a condition called fetal alcohol spectrum disorder.
The cause is maternal alcohol use when the child is in utero. That could be any degree of alcohol use and affects the child's development and becomes a lifelong neurodevelopmental problem.
A study by the Telethon Kids Institute found that in Western Australia, 4 in 10 children in detention had FASD, and that 89% had some form of neurological condition.
FASD affects young people's behaviour through irritability, aggression, difficulty self-monitoring and self-regulating.
Brain conditions like FASD affect executive functioning, the parts of the brain that control impulses, and the ability to understand consequences.
They're unable to engage in the community sufficiently. They're unable to perform the activities of everyday life that you and I might do. It is an underdiagnosed condition. Most assessments need to involve a multidisciplinary team, and often in regional and remote areas, those services aren't available.
We spoke to a First Nations kinship carer, who we're calling Penny. She's the legal guardian for 2 brothers, aged 15 and 16, who have spent extensive time in watch houses and detention centres. Both boys were diagnosed with FASD last year.
They're happy kids when they're home, very polite. They're just these little kids that have grown up too quick.
Penny has decided to move the boys out of Brisbane in the hope it gives them some stability.
Give the kids another start, have them more around community, back on country, around family.
The boys were only diagnosed with FASD years after they first entered the youth justice system.
I don't understand how they didn't get diagnosed, being under all these departments and in these institutions.
In January this year, the boys were arrested and held in watch houses for 15 days straight. Penny claims the boys were mistreated.
The police had taken their mattresses and their blankets because they were laughing at night.
Their lawyers allege one of the boys had his medication withheld for 4 days.
I couldn't even ring up to say, are they okay? They wouldn't give me no information whatsoever. And culturally, it's not good enough.
If you put that child in an isolated detention environment, what you will see is an exacerbation of that dysregulation. So you will see behaviour such as hitting the walls, acting out, becoming aggressive, becoming very heightened, and for that young person to be really unable to regulate their own behaviour.
We wanted to show footage of Sam in an isolation cell in a watch house to the Queensland Youth Justice Minister.
So Ben from The Guardian, I'm here with the film crew from SBS The Feed. We're making a documentary about the youth justice situation.
After her office declined 4 times to do an interview, she finally agreed.
Minister, what's your reaction to watching that footage?
Look, I'm not going to comment on an individual case. Of course, no one wants to see a young person in distress. No one wants to see a young person mistreated. It is why we have a very strong system of accountability in our watch houses. We have at least 7 oversight bodies going into those watch houses on a regular basis.
Back in 2019, Farmer was trying to get children out of watch houses.
If we persist with the lock 'em up and throw away the key approach with our young people, that is exactly what will happen. There's an almost 100% chance that young people will reoffend.
So why are we doing something, putting more children in that system that we know does not work, that you have said does not work?
I make no apology for keeping the community safe. So if a young person is a risk to themselves or to the community, then they will be detained, and they are in detention or in a watch house because a court has judged that they be placed there.
The girl in the footage you saw is on your department's serious repeat offender index, and that means that she ends up being targeted by police operations like Task Force Guardian. Now, I'm interested in knowing why she is not getting the help that she needs.
Look, I don't know the young woman in question. I don't know the case in question. But what I can tell you is that all of our intervention programs at the moment, priority is placed on our serious repeat offenders. And they're telling me about young people who they're hooking back into education, or they're referring for mental health services, or they're making sure they have a roof over their head. There is a balance to this. If that young person is a threat to the community, then we have to keep the community safe.
Tim Spall does equine therapy with Indigenous kids, many who've been through the juvenile justice system. He's lost count of how many kids have taken their own life.
Well and truly over the 50, closer to 100 young people that I've worked with and built relationships with, we would have lost to suicide. And for some kids, they genuinely see it as their only option to escape.
Here he is.
What we have is a generation of First Nations kids that don't know who they are because they're so disconnected from their culture.
The program aims to divert kids away from the youth justice system.
What we do here is combine the equine therapy, which treats the trauma. It feels rewarding. When you connect with a horse, you can feel it. I sure appreciate you fellas coming out. Really important that we try to build those relationships with horses, and then we try to build them relationships with people. We build them up. We start to tell them this is who they are. This is what they're good at.
Stop! Put your leg in.
Since last year, Sam has been arrested 5 times. She's now seen the inside of a watch house more than 10 times.
You got my arm again! You got my arm again!
She could not live independently, my granddaughter, but I would like her to have a life that she doesn't experience trauma after trauma just because she's different from an average person.
Society is essentially telling them that they're a criminal. Once they go into that system, they identify as criminals and that pathway continues.
And with the state election months away and both sides of Queensland politics promising they'll be even tougher on youth crime, more kids like Sam will continue to be put in adult watch houses and in isolation.
There is no such thing as a bad kid. There are traumatised children. These kids, they're not born naughty. Something has happened. We've got to identify what that is and build on that.
If you like that video and want to see more, subscribe to The Feed's YouTube channel.